I'm here to tell you that your human worth is not irreducible to your paycheck. You, as a human being, are a form of energy, an effervescent, flowing life form with its own heart, with its own pulsing vibrancy and spirit, and yet you've been reduced to a mere clerk, a cog in a machine, by this system that has no other intention for you than to exploit your labor, to foist upon your very nakedness as a being in existence that needs to resuscitate its own being in form and fashion. And in every instance of this permutation, what does it give you? Corporatism, hierarchy. It puts you under the jackboot of its despotic sovereign nations, small sovereign nations, in the form of businesses, to where you succumb to a CEO, boss who has no intention to treat you as a human. You're not a family. You're not a part of a community. You're nothing more than just an expendable piece of capital. You're not a important and respected individual in this system. If it was so like that, I wish it was like that. I wish it was so like this. Because then in that case, you would be paid in requisite to what you were worth. Not in what you produced, what you created would be given back to you. But instead, wages are kept stagnant, work hours are raised, and you're expected to produce in excess to what you're paid. And in this sense, it's incredibly exploitative. Let's get out. The only way that the working class are going to be able to extricate themselves from the jackboot, from the ever-decreasing decline of the middle class, of the working class, is to collectivize their efforts against the growing, distending bellies of the rich. We could become rich ourselves only through our brotherhood and our community. Collective efforts in wealth creation, comrades. Get money together. This is why we need to start our own collective community, working in tandem together towards creating more money. There's nothing wrong with being wealthy. It's just that the game has been changing. They keep changing the rules of the game. The wealthy will continue their escalation towards the heavens with the wealth gap and the income going mainly in what could only be termed as a lion's share of the national income. GDP goes to the wealthy, the 1%, not even the 1% anymore. It's like the 0.001% now. They're distending gullets. They're not leaving anything behind for the majority of people. And instead they try to insist a privileged group will try to maintain its status by justifying it, legitimizing it as being a natural, a priori cause. Well, my comrades, it is what it is. It's artificial. You're artificially kept in a state of panic and desperation in order to exploit the necessary surplus labor out of your body, out of your blood and bones, to turn you into nothing more than a cog to create this capital. We could create our own machines. We could do this if the collective of a corporate hierarchy is the dependent force to which the capital is produced. Why couldn't we have a legitimate community of working class people whose collective net worth would inevitably raise their standard. Because isn't that what Reaganomics, isn't that what trickle-down economics was supposed to do, right? Almost 30 years ago. That was what we were promised. And yet we see that divergence, that distinct divergence between the middle class going downward and the upper class going upward. The 1%, the 0.001%, that directly contradicts the idea of what Reaganomics was supposed to have done. Instead, if that was the case, if the not leveraging so much taxation against the wealthy was to increase the raising of all ships for everybody, a rising tide raises all ships, then we would see a distinct paralleling between the two. But no, it's not. That's not what that is, comrades. That's not what it is. It's exploitation. It's worse than that. If we want to do this peacefully, we can play by their rules, but only if we become one person, if we become one entity, one corporate entity, one collective entity. The new capitalism will not be a capitalism of individuality. I can no longer function an individual person, as we see the millennial class of an entire generation has not been buying homes. They have nothing to afford, to their name, no capital, no equity whatsoever, merely living paycheck to paycheck, hand over fist, in a never-ending cycle, a cyclical rat wheel, like a hamster wheel, keeping them there, and it's getting worse and worse. The last recession was supposed to be the worst in history, and they're getting lower and lower. They're getting worse and worse. These depressions, these recessions. At what point is the whole system going to collapse? And the corporates, the 1%, they don't do anything about it. They pay no knowledge to them destroying themselves. The capitalists dig their own graves. They are the grave diggers of their own misfortune by not taking into account that there needs to be a level of raising the majority. When the majority collapses, a dysfunctioned and disillusioned majority, angry, starving masses, where are they going to turn? Where will they get their food? They will consume the 1%. If you want to protect the interests of the corporates, of the multi-billionaires, multi-millionaires, your best bet is to side with me, is to raise the working class as a security against revolution. Security against revolution. Nobody's selling you this. I'm feeding it to you. It's here. It's now. I can keep the working class from revolting against their masters, the lords. If we're going to have a despotic system, a sovereign entity ruling and lording over you in your day-to-day existence, if that's the freedom that you've bastardized freedom, that you've sold to people to keep them nothing more than just scum suckers on the sole of your jackboot, with no promissory note of equity in an individualistic system, then communism can only function as a smaller entity within capitalism. Smaller cells working together as collective communities. The structure cannot support, the current structure can definitely not support the descending fat ass of these aristocratic elites, the neo-capitalist aristocratic elites, like in the movie Dune, where you have a intergalactic feudal society. Capitalism and feudalism are different, but across human societies, for some reason, social structure is immanent. It's a universal. There is no equity. There's no equal society. There's no society that's ever besides small band communities, even within the chiefdoms and the tribal societies, small bands, there's still gerontocracy, there's still oligarchy, there's still social structure. So if we can accept human nature and use it pragmatically, the millennial class, the working class millennials, can pull themselves up only collectively. The individualistic model is decaying. If we're going to take market share from the GDP away from the distending fat stomachs, these gluttonous, greedy billionaires will need to band together and create familial communities where we can have our own independent, self-sufficient. Isn't that what freedom was? In the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in America, this new movement towards urban living, whereby a person was rented their bodies instead of being sold off once and for all. But for 8 hours a day, it was seen as a direct affront to the very nature of their ideology of republicanism, of freedom. They came from having a rich traditional background. People from these rural communities were being funneled into 12-hour shifts at factories, miserable lifestyles, and it was once adopted by the Republican Party. The word wage slave was actually used as a slogan for the Republican Party to protect people against this. And now it's been normalized. It's been widespread. The human pig has become the swine, the livestock. And nobody talks about it. Nobody wants to bring it up. People live in their little, in German they call it Pferdblinde. Your horse blinders. Open it up and expand your consciousness. Life is a much more meaningful experience that is never injected into the working 9 to 5. The truth is never told in the 9 to 5.